Hollywood is spiraling into chaos tonight, as shocking new claims pull Blake Lively into a storm no one saw coming. Secrets from the past are colliding with explosive legal battles, and even her closest allies are falling silent. Is this the unraveling of Hollywood's golden girl, or the start of something even darker? The story that has engulfed Blake Lively and the entertainment industry at large is one that feels less like a passing headline and more like the slow-motion implosion of a star who once seemed untouchable. And as we peel back the layers of this saga, we begin to see how every piece of her past, every word spoken in interviews, every relationship with co-stars and friends, and even every whispered rumor has converged into a firestorm that will not die down. Instead, it only grows louder and more intense with each revelation. And the foundation of this story begins with an unsettling sense of discomfort, the very word that Blake herself has used to describe her encounters with Justin Baldoni. And though uncomfortable has become one of those words that resonates in Hollywood and beyond, it carries weight. It suggests something that is not outright criminal, but also not harmless. It suggests a gray zone where perception and experience create a battlefield of narratives, and that is exactly what has happened here. Because when Blake filed her complaint against Baldoni, she did so with the confidence that others would rally behind her, and indeed Liz Plank, who co-hosted the Man Enough podcast alongside Baldoni, immediately quit the project, and did so in a way that seemed to echo solidarity with Blake. Yet this reaction was not without controversy, because commentators quickly noted that Liz had not heard Justin's side of the story, had not investigated further, but simply aligned herself with Blake. And it was this quick shift that opened the door to deeper scrutiny into whether alliances in Hollywood are formed on truth or strategy. And this is where names like Ryan Reynolds and his calculated PR maneuvering enter the picture, because whispers suggested that Liz Plank was the perfect ally for Blake to have, and her abrupt exit played into a broader strategy of public narrative management. And that idea alone fueled speculation that this scandal was never about just one uncomfortable interaction, but about a carefully orchestrated series of moves designed to solidify Blake's position at the expense of her co-star. And then came the shocking intervention from Candace Owens, a voice that often courts controversy, but whose words carry undeniable reach. And when Owens suggested that there existed a list of supposed victims tied to Blake Lively, the internet exploded, because while she provided no specific names, the implication was enough to send fans, journalists, and insiders digging into every corner of Blake's career. And what they began to unearth painted a picture that was far more complicated than the flawless Hollywood persona Blake had built for years. And one of the first pieces of evidence to resurface was a 2009 Glamour UK interview in which Blake openly admitted that when Penn Badgley was cast in Gossip Girl, she despised the idea and attempted to turn the cast against him. And though she later backtracked, saying she eventually came around to appreciating his authenticity, the damage of those words cannot be understated, because they revealed a willingness to manipulate and create division. Even as she tried to package the story as youthful immaturity or behind-the-scenes tension, the effect now is that it looks like a blueprint for a pattern of behavior. And what made it worse was the fact that Taylor Momsen, a fellow castmate, contradicted Blake's memory, insisting she had no recollection of any such negativity, which raises the unnerving question: was Blake embellishing the story to appear more interesting, or was she revealing a deeper tendency to rewrite dynamics to suit her narrative? This question has become central in how the public now evaluates every new allegation against her, because if she could twist a story for an interview years ago, what does that mean for the accusations and defenses flying around her today? And from there, the dominoes began to fall. A crisis management expert, Jed Wallace, filed a defamation lawsuit accusing Blake of falsely claiming he masterminded an online smear campaign against her, which he said obliterated his reputation and livelihood. And in Hollywood, where reputation is currency, this lawsuit landed like a bomb, because it was no longer about on-set disputes. It was about legal battles with tangible consequences. And while Blake's camp has pushed back the optics of suing someone who accuses her of lying about defamation, only fuels the sense that she is cornered by her own contradictions. And then there was the startling allegation contained in her own legal filings, in which she claimed a man entered her room while she was breastfeeding without permission, an allegation that carries enormous weight. But the story took a turn when conflicting accounts suggested she may have allowed him in, or at least not objected in a way that made the situation clear. And that contradiction has become emblematic of the larger problem facing her story, because it is no longer about one claim versus another. It is about a pattern of inconsistency. And in Hollywood, where perception often eclipses fact, inconsistency is deadly. And while this chaos brewed, more stories surfaced about her professional conduct, such as allegations from the set of A Simple Favor, where assistant director Barbara Seaman allegedly felt driven to the brink of resignation due to Blake's difficult behavior. These accounts, when placed side by side with legal turmoil and resurfaced interviews, created a snowball of negativity that no PR spin could easily counter. And then came one of the most disturbing stories of memory from nearly 2 decades ago, when a former intern named Jaime recalled being only 20 years old, assigned the simple task of handing out water bottles at an event where a 17-year-old Blake was promoting sisterhood of the traveling pants. And though Jaime never even spoke directly to Blake, she was later accused by Blake of making her uncomfortable simply by existing in the same space. And this accusation left the young intern reprimanded, humiliated, and terrified her career might end before it began. And today, as that story resurfaces, it carries a haunting resonance because it suggests that Blake's perception of being uncomfortable has long been a weapon she wielded, and not always in a way that others could understand or defend against. And when you combine that anecdote with everything else that has been unearthed, a troubling web begins to emerge, one where allegations, contradictions, legal disputes, and personal accounts overlap into a portrait that feels more like a labyrinth of behavior than a single isolated event. And so, the narrative forming around Blake is no longer whether she had one bad experience or whether she is the victim of media exaggeration. It is whether she has spent her entire career building a flawless persona, while leaving behind a trail of damaged relationships, silenced allies, and conflicting stories. And Hollywood is left asking, is this the moment where the carefully crafted image shatters? Or is this yet another cycle of scandal that the industry will quickly move past? The truth is unclear, but the storm is only growing louder, and the consequences only more devastating as each new piece falls into place. And what makes this even more riveting and terrifying is that it all leads into the looming trial against Justin Baldoni, a trial that will drag every buried story, every contradiction, and every ally or enemy into the harshest spotlight imaginable. And as the date approaches in March 2026, the stakes have never been higher, not just for Blake Lively, but for everyone connected to her legacy, her friendships, and her carefully built career. And the question that hangs in the air is simple: will the truth set her free, or will it finally break her? As the storm around Blake Lively intensifies and more details continue to surface, the question is no longer whether she will face scrutiny, but whether her entire career can survive the avalanche of allegations, contradictions, and mounting legal battles. And to truly understand the gravity of what is happening, we have to consider not just the lawsuits or the resurfaced interviews, but the culture of Hollywood itself, a place where image is currency, where a single scandal can redefine a career, and where silence from friends can sometimes speak louder than words. Because in this environment, every decision Blake makes, every statement she issues, and every person she loses or gains as an ally becomes another piece of evidence in the larger trial that is not just happening in the courtroom, but in the court of public opinion. And right now, that court is unrelenting and merciless. And one of the most chilling signs of this shift is the way her relationships are unraveling before our eyes, because former friends who once stood by her are now stepping back, quietly distancing themselves in ways that feel deliberate and strategic. An insider revealed that Blake has been calling in favors desperate to keep her allies close, but many are no longer answering the phone. And that silence suggests not just fatigue, but fear. Because in Hollywood, to remain tied to a scandalized figure can be career suicide. And as her circle shrinks, so too does her power, because the same people who once celebrated her on red carpets and supported her projects are now hesitant to even mention her name. And it is not just about friendships, it is about business. Because fashion houses that once proudly counted her as a muse are pulling back one major brand has allegedly paused their partnership until the storm passes, if it ever does. And that decision speaks volumes because for a fashion house, image is everything. And right now, Blake's name does not represent glamour, but controversy, and risk is not marketable, and the effect ripples outward into the world of Hollywood studios, which are said to be growing increasingly reluctant to attach her to major projects, because no matter how talented she is, or how dedicated to her craft, the truth is that investors want security, not scandal, and that harsh reality has reportedly already cost her at least one major film opportunity, which sources say stalled out when executives decided her name carried too much noise, too much chaos to justify the gamble. And this is perhaps the cruelest twist of all, because for years, Blake Lively was known as a safe bet, the glamorous star who could bring fashion prestige, Hollywood credibility, and a loyal fan, based to any project. But today, she is seen as the opposite, and that transformation is not just shocking, it is devastating for her career trajectory, and yet even as her professional opportunities shrink, her personal challenges only grow larger. Because inside the courtroom, she faces the defamation lawsuit from Jed Wallace, which could expose her private communications and behind-the-scenes dealings. And she faces the March 2026 trial against Justin Baldoni, which promises to become a spectacle that no one in Hollywood will be able to ignore. And legal experts have already warned that the resurfaced accounts of toxic workplace behavior from assistants, stylists, and former colleagues could influence how a jury or judge perceives her credibility. Because once doubt creeps in, it is nearly impossible to erase. And this is why the silence of Taylor Swift looms like a shadow over the entire saga. Because Taylor has built a reputation as someone fiercely loyal to her inner circle, she has gone to battle for friends in the public eye time, and again, yet in this moment, as Blake faces what could be the defining scandal of her career, Taylor has said nothing. And while silence is not proof of guilt or innocence, the optics are undeniable because if Blake's closest friend in the industry will not publicly defend her, then what message does that send to the rest of Hollywood? And the answer might be devastating because it suggests that even those who know her best are uncertain about her side of the story. And this is where perception and reality blur. Because while Blake may truly believe she has been wronged by Justin Baldoni, or by media narratives, the refusal of her allies to step forward makes it appear as though she is isolated. And that perception is often as damaging as any verdict. And yet amidst the silence, there are still some voices of support. Actress Jenny Slate has publicly defended her, suggesting that not everyone in Hollywood is ready to abandon Blake. But the contrast between Jenny's lone voice and the resounding silence of others only makes the divide more glaring because Hollywood is not united in its perception of her. It is fractured and divided with some whispering doubts and others quietly, standing aside waiting to see what the outcome will be. And while all of this unfolds, new stories continue to surface from the shadows. Stories of former assistants who claim Blake was cold, dismissive, or unkind stories of stylists who say she demanded. Last-minute changes that push teams to exhaustion, stories of production staff who felt overlooked or belittled. And while none of these accusations individually may amount to scandal, when woven together into the current climate, they create an image of someone who has long left behind a trail of discontent. And the tragedy of this narrative is that even her fans are beginning to fracture. Social media, once filled with adoration, is now split between those who continue to defend her fiercely and those who express betrayal, wondering if the Blake they loved was only ever a carefully constructed mask, and viral posts from disillusioned fans saying things like, "I used to love her, but now I wonder if we ever knew the real Blake carry enormous weight," because in the digital age, public opinion can shift faster than any PR strategy can control. And right now the momentum is against her, and her PR team knows it. Reports suggest she has reached out to top crisis managers to salvage her image. But at least one executive turned her down, allegedly saying her situation was too unstable to fix. And that rejection is a brutal symbol of how dire things have become. Because if the people paid to repair reputations believe yours cannot be saved, what hope remains? And this leaves Blake standing at a crossroads unlike anything she has faced before, because for years she was the golden girl of Hollywood, celebrated not only for her talent, but for her fashion, for her marriage to Ryan Reynolds. 4. Her friendship with Taylor Swift for her image as someone who seemed flawless both on and off screen. But today, all of that has been called into question, and the very foundation of her identity as a public figure feels as though it is crumbling. Because no matter what happens in court, the damage to her image may already be irreversible. And in Hollywood, where perception is often more powerful than fact, the question is not whether she will win or lose her cases. It is whether she can ever be seen the same way again. And as the industry whispers grow louder, as allies fade, as lawsuits pile up, as brands pull away, the suspense only deepens because the ending to this saga has yet to be written, and the stakes could not be higher. The story only grows more complex as we move deeper into the fallout, because what started as a whisper of tension between Blake Lively and Justin Baldoni has now turned into a roaring firestorm that stretches far beyond the courtroom spilling, into Hollywood boardrooms, private dinners, and even online communities that once celebrated them both. And what makes this moment so critical is that every action, every leaked message, every legal twist is being amplified by a media machine that thrives on conflict and spectacle, with each network and outlet scrambling to frame the narrative in their favor. And in that chaos, we see the cracks forming in the very foundation of celebrity culture as one side attempts to cling to carefully curated images of family-friendly perfection, while the other leans into vulnerability, authenticity, and the rhetoric of truth-telling. And the contrast could not be starker, because Blake has always positioned herself as the golden girl, the flawless starlet who built a reputation on elegance, grace, and a picture-perfect family life with Ryan Reynolds, while Justin has long been the earnest creative, a filmmaker and advocate who positioned himself as a champion of empathy and representation. And now, those identities are colliding with raw force in a space where only one narrative can dominate the public imagination. And as audiences watch this clash unfold, many are beginning to ask who really benefits from all of this. Who gains power when reputations are destroyed, and whose voices get silenced in the process? Because it is no longer just about whether Blake fabricated claims or whether Justin was wronged, but about how the industry itself chooses to respond when its own structures are threatened by transparency and accountability. And it is in that uncertainty that the most powerful figures begin to maneuver. Because behind the scenes, we know that publicists, managers, and legal strategists are working overtime crafting statements, planting stories, and negotiating coverage in ways that the public will never fully see. But the impact of those strategies becomes clear when headlines shift, when hashtags trend, and when audiences unconsciously internalize narratives that were carefully seeded to protect or destroy. And what makes the present moment different is the role of social media, where every fan, every critic, and every anonymous account can inject their perspective into the conversation, creating a sprawling digital courtroom where the verdict is decided not by judges, but by the sheer volume of opinion and outrage. And as Blake finds herself increasingly targeted by waves of criticism, one cannot ignore how swiftly online communities pivoted from adoration to disdain, and how merciless that transformation can be. Because the same platforms that once amplified her fashion moments and charity work are now dissecting her every word, gesture, and silence, searching for inconsistencies to expose and exploit. While Justin finds unexpected allies rallying behind him as the underdog, the victim who weathered an unfair storm, and is now framed as standing tall with resilience and quiet strength. Yet even this framing is not entirely organic, because it too is shaped by media outlets sympathetic to his narrative, and by influencers who see engagement gold in aligning themselves with his side. And so we must ask ourselves how much of what we are witnessing is genuine outrage, and how much is engineered by forces that understand the profitability of conflict and scandal. Because whether you stand with Blake or with Justin, the undeniable reality is that this saga has captured the cultural imagination in ways that extend far beyond the individuals involved. It has become a parable of celebrity power struggles, a cautionary tale about reputational warfare, and a live demonstration of how truth is contested in the modern media age. And if we look closely at the timing of certain leaks, at the sudden emergence of old acquaintances stepping forward, at the strategic silences of high-profile friends, it becomes clear that the chessboard is far larger than what appears on the surface, because for every move we see, there are 5 more happening. Quietly in the background, negotiated in boardrooms, whispered at private dinners, or tested through anonymous social media drops. And the weight of that reality is staggering, because it means that no outcome here will ever be pure or uncomplicated. It will always be shaped by manipulation, influence, and power dynamics that exist far beyond the reach of the average fan or observer. And that realization is perhaps the most unsettling part of all, because it forces us to question not just who is telling the truth, but whether truth even matters in a space where perception is everything, and where victory often belongs not to the honest, but to the strategic. And that is why the next phase of this battle promises to be even more explosive. Because as court deadlines approach, as depositions loom, and as more private communications risk exposure, both sides are escalating their tactics, preparing for a confrontation that will not only decide their personal legacies, but may very well reshape the way Hollywood handles internal disputes and accountability moving forward. And with every passing day, the stakes rise higher, the rhetoric grows sharper, and the sense that something irreversible is about to happen becomes impossible to ignore. And so we arrive at the end of this explosive journey, the kind of ride that leaves you shaken, questioning everything you thought you knew about power, influence, and the fragile walls celebrities build around themselves. We have peeled back the layers, exposing the contradictions, the shifting narratives, and the uncomfortable truths that Hollywood would rather keep buried. This saga has not just been about courtrooms, lawyers, or leaked documents. It has been about reputations unraveling, in real time about public trust being tested, and about the extraordinary lengths people will go to in order to protect the images they have so carefully constructed. What began as whispers has now become a roar. The evidence has shifted the tide, and every single player in this drama is now standing at the edge of a cliff, waiting to see who will fall and who will somehow survive the storm. The media circus shows no signs of slowing down. The public hunger for answers only grows fiercer by the day, and the ripple effects are reaching corners of the industry. That no one expected, alliances have been broken, friendships have been tested, and the truth, though messy and brutal, is coming out, whether those involved are ready or not. This is the type of story that will echo for years, the type of scandal that will be remembered as a turning point, a moment when the facade of glamour cracked wide open to reveal the chaos underneath. We are not at the final chapter yet, but what we have seen so far guarantees that the ending will be nothing short of explosive. And when that final curtain drops, it will not just change careers, it will change everything.